Far beyond the crowded noise of cities, where the earth stretches into endless golden shadow, a single mountain rises from the heart of the desert. Its slopes glow beneath the sun like molten bronze, and when night falls, its outline carves itself against the stars with a quiet majesty that seems almost alive. This is Mount Sinai, known through faiths and ages as the place where heaven once touched the earth, where the invisible spoke in fire, and silence itself became a language of the divine. Those who approach it for the first time often describe a stillness unlike any other. The air feels charged, as if it remembers something sacred. Even the wind seems reluctant to disturb the stones. Time slows here. Footsteps echo differently, hearts beat slower, and the boundary between the world of men and the realm of eternity grows thin. In this desert, where light burns with unbearable purity, mystery waits like a sleeping flame, ready to awaken those who listen. Long before it became a holy site, before scriptures named it as the meeting place between God and man, Sinai already held a power that drew wanderers toward it. Ancient nomads called it the Mountain of Fire. Believing spirits lived upon its summit. They told stories of lights moving through the night sky, of voices carried upon the wind, of unseen presences that watched from the cliffs. Even without temples or prophets, the land itself seemed to whisper that it was more than stone. When dusk falls and the last light fades behind the ridges, the mountain glows in memory of the sun, its peaks outlined in soft crimson and gold. The desert cools, the air thickens with silence, and stars spill across the sky like embers. Those who sleep beneath Sinai often dream deeply, dreams filled with soundless music, with visions of light moving through darkness, with the sense that something ancient is near. Perhaps that is why travelers still come, century after century, to stand in its shadow and feel that same pulse of wonder. Every path leading here is a pilgrimage, whether walked in faith, in doubt, or in quiet curiosity. To gaze upon Sinai is to stand before a living symbol of connection, a place where the eternal once leaned close enough for humanity to hear. It reminds us that even in the most barren wilderness, revelation waits, that silence is not emptiness but presence, that the divine has never stopped speaking. It only asks that we slow down enough to listen. If you enjoy journeys like this, stories where history and mystery intertwine, make sure to subscribe to the channel, give this film a like, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support helps this story reach more seekers across the world and keeps the flame of wonder burning bright. Long before a divine voice echoed across the wilderness, the Sinai Peninsula stretched out as a vast and untamed expanse, where the earth met the sky in waves of burning gold. The land was neither dead nor alive. It existed in a kind of sacred stillness, breathing through the rhythm of wind and sand. Jagged cliffs rose from the plains like the bones of ancient gods, their faces carved by centuries of desert storms. Travelers crossing this harsh terrain often felt as though they had stepped outside of time, walking across a landscape that belonged not to man, but to something older and more patient. Across the shifting dunes, mirages shimmered under the relentless sun, creating visions of impossible lakes and green oases that dissolved with every step forward. The air rippled with heat, blurring the line between real and unreal. For those who ventured through this wilderness, the desert became both adversary and teacher. It demanded silence, humility, and endurance. To survive its emptiness was to be stripped of illusion, left only with the whisper of wind and the beating of one's heart. That quiet was not absence, it was presence, vast and immeasurable. Ancient caravans once moved across this land, their camels laden with frankincense, myrrh, and spices bound for distant kingdoms. At night, as fires flickered low, Stories traveled faster than the sandstorms. The elders spoke of a mountain of fire rising from the heart of the desert, a place where the stars seemed to bend closer, and voices could be heard in the wind. These tales passed through generations, long before the time of Moses, long before Scripture named the mountain holy. People spoke of lights that danced on its slopes, of figures made of flame walking through the darkness, and of shadows that bowed in reverence to unseen presences. In the farthest reaches of memory, before the desert bore the footprints of prophets, nomadic tribes already treated Sinai as a boundary between the known and the unknowable. They approached its base with quiet awe, leaving offerings of water, salt, or desert flowers. To them, the mountain was alive, not in flesh but in spirit. It was said to breathe when the winds swept through its passes, to hum beneath the stars. Such beliefs may seem like fragments of forgotten myth, yet in the hush of this landscape, one can almost believe that the mountain listened. The color of the land changes with the light. At dawn, the sands blush with rose and amber. By noon, they blaze like molten gold. As evening approaches, a soft violet hue descends, wrapping the world in a veil of mystery. Even those who have walked this terrain for decades claim that Sinai never looks the same twice. Its face is always shifting, as though the desert conceals secrets it refuses to surrender all at once. Beneath the silence lies a sense of waiting, like a pause before revelation. Far to the south, ancient inscriptions still hide among the rocks, symbols carved by forgotten hands, prayers to gods whose names have long since vanished. Scholars who later studied them spoke of a universal longing, etched into stone, to touch something eternal. Perhaps those early wanderers already sensed what was to come. They did not know the name of the divine that would one day speak from the mountain's fire, but they felt its approach as one feels the first tremor before a storm. In the deepest parts of the desert, near where the sands turn to red stone, the wind sometimes carries a low hum like the sound of distant chanting. Bedouins say the earth itself remembers. They believe these are echoes of ancient rites performed by those who once called upon the desert spirit. Whether born of myth or memory, the stories still cling to the rocks, carried forward by every gust of wind, every grain of sand that moves across the face of Sinai. When darkness falls, the land grows colder than ice. Stars spill across the heavens, piercingly bright, so close that one might imagine brushing against them. Travelers often stopped in the night to gaze upward, feeling as though the entire sky had descended to rest upon the mountain. In that silence, under the infinite canopy of stars, the idea of the divine did not seem far away. It was near, hidden in the breath between one heartbeat and the next. Through endless ages, Sinai stood untouched, waiting for the day when its silence would break. But even before the voice, before the fire, before the name, the mountain already bore a kind of holiness, the quiet sanctity of a place where the earth seemed to lean toward heaven, as if listening for something that had not yet been spoken. As dawn glides across the horizon, the desert awakens not with sound but with vibration, the slow, deep hum of wind curling through ravines and over dunes. Ancient travelers spoke of these murmurs with reverence, unsure whether they were tricks of nature or whispers from another realm. The sound did not always come from above. It seemed to rise from beneath the ground, as if the mountain itself were breathing out secrets it had held for eternity. Those who camped near the base of Sinai told tales of voices carried by the night wind. Some said the whispers spoke in forgotten tongues, others that they called the listener by name. Fear and fascination intertwined in equal measure. Men would lie awake, eyes fixed on the darkness beyond their fires, hearts thudding in rhythm with the desert's song. A few claimed that if one listened too long, the voice would enter their dreams and show them visions, cities of light, stairways of fire, and beings made of flame walking between the dunes. For centuries, these stories traveled from tribe to tribe, spreading like embers caught on the wind. Each retelling changed the shape of the mystery, but never its essence. People came to believe that angels wandered the mountain valleys, not in shining forms of gold, but cloaked in storm and shadow. Some described them as towering shapes of brilliance. Others said they appeared as men with eyes that glowed like stars. The desert, they believed, was not empty, but alive with unseen movement, a meeting ground for the earthly and the celestial. Echoes played strange tricks in this landscape. A single shout could bounce between cliffs, returning distorted, multiplied and layered, sounding like a chorus. Those who had never known solitude often found themselves unnerved by how the desert seemed to answer back. To the mystics and wanderers who came seeking solitude, these echoes were not illusion, they were communication. They believed that the mountain spoke to those who were pure of heart, offering glimpses of what lay beyond mortal understanding. In moonlight, the dunes looked like waves upon an endless sea. Travelers spoke of phantom fires that flickered across distant ridges, though no one could find their source. The air carried a metallic scent, sharp and electric, and the wind sang through the stones in tones that felt deliberate, like notes of an invisible melody. The mountains seemed to listen, to watch, to wait. Every gust of air, every shifting grain of sand, hinted at a presence hidden behind the veil of the physical world. Monks of later centuries, drawn to Sinai's solitude, recorded experiences that echoed these ancient accounts. They spoke of nights when the stars pulsed like living embers and the silence turned dense as though filled with unseen movement. Some said they felt hands of light touch their shoulders while they prayed. These encounters were never loud or dramatic. They came as soft intrusions upon stillness, dissolving as quickly as breath fades into the wind. The local Bedouins, inheritors of an oral memory stretching beyond written history, believed the voices belonged to the messengers of heaven who once descended upon the mountain. They told of angels who guarded hidden paths, whose songs could be heard in the wind before great changes in the world. To them, Sinai was not only a place of revelation, but a living presence, a messenger itself, transmitting divine language through stone and air. By day, the voices faded beneath the sun's glare, replaced by silence so profound it seemed to hum in the bones. But at dusk, when the air cooled and shadows stretched long across the sand, the murmurs would rise again. Those who walked alone between the rocks felt the desert tighten around them, as though invisible eyes followed each step. The voices would drift closer, always just beyond recognition, leaving the listener caught between awe and terror. In this world of echoes and illusions, the line between heaven and earth grew thin. The mountain became a vessel for mystery, a bridge suspended between silence and sound. Through it all, the desert kept its secret, a presence older than memory, waiting for the moment when it would no longer whisper, but speak. Long before his name became legend, Moses walked the earth as a fugitive, carrying the weight of a past he could not escape. The sands of Midian became his refuge, a place where exile turned into solitude. The desert stripped him of titles, of power, of certainty. Each step across its barren expanse erased another trace of the man he had been in Egypt. In that endless silence, he was left with nothing but himself and the whisper of destiny moving just beyond his reach. Days in the wilderness blurred into one another. The sun burned the skin, the wind scoured the senses, and the stars offered cold comfort in the night. Moses learned to read the land as one might read a sacred text, the shape of the dunes, the path of migrating herds, the pulse of distant springs. Beneath the harshness of the desert, he found a strange rhythm, as if the wilderness itself were preparing him for something greater. Solitude became his companion, silence his teacher. The memory of Egypt haunted him, the golden halls, the cruel command of kings, the cries of the enslaved. He had fled not only from Pharaoh's wrath, but from his own guilt. In the stillness of exile, every thought returned to the moment of violence that had changed his fate. The desert gave him no distraction, only the mirror of himself reflected in endless space. Through that mirror, something within him began to awaken, a restless stirring, like a call that had not yet spoken its name. Among the shepherds of Midian, Moses found humble labor, guiding flocks through the valleys near Sinai. The mountains loomed on the horizon like guardians of secrets, their peaks shrouded in mist and fire-colored cloud. Each day he led his sheep closer to the heart of that wilderness, drawn by a pull he could not explain. Though he told himself it was only for pasture, something deeper urged him onward, a quiet voice within that whispered of purpose not yet revealed. The people of Midian spoke softly about the mountain. They said it was a place where spirits walked, where voices spoke in the wind, and where light sometimes burned without consuming what it touched. Moses listened, but said nothing. Still he felt an unspoken recognition, as if part of him already belonged to that place. The air near Sinai carried a stillness unlike any other, a stillness that listened. Nights near the mountain held a strange beauty. The sky deepened into indigo and the stars hung so close they seemed to breathe. Moses would often sit alone, watching the horizon, feeling the pull of something vast and unnameable. In those moments, the silence felt alive, almost sentient. He did not yet know that this quiet would one day break open in fire, that his path would rise from the dust into light. But the mountain already knew. Through years of wandering, he grew attuned to the subtleties of the desert. He could sense shifts in wind, taste rain before clouds appeared, read the movement of birds as signs of unseen patterns. The wilderness had become his sanctuary and his crucible. It burned away everything unnecessary, leaving only faith, not in gods of stone or crown, but in the still voice that waited in the depths of his being. When the first glimmer of destiny finally stirred on the horizon, it came not with thunder, but with silence. A simple day of tending flocks, a stray path, a mountain slope. What awaited him there would change the course of history, but at that moment Moses was only a wanderer, following sheep through a barren land, unaware that each step was leading him toward the divine fire that would awaken his true name. Heat shimmered across the horizon as Moses guided his flock through a narrow valley. The ground beneath his sandals radiated warmth like coals beneath the surface, and the air quivered with unseen tension. Above the crags of Horeb, the sky burned white with sun, and silence pressed upon the world, as if creation itself were holding its breath. Every sound was swallowed by the desert, until only the faint bleating of sheep and the whisper of sand against rock remained. It was within that stillness, so complete it felt almost sacred, that he noticed the glow. A flicker of gold deep among the stones. At first, he thought it the reflection of sunlight caught on mineral veins, but the light pulsed with rhythm, alive, deliberate. He drew closer, each step measured, as the wind died completely. Around a small thorn bush, a sphere of fire swirled in absolute stillness. The branches blazed with fierce light, though not a single leaf turned to ash. The flame seemed to dance within itself, devouring nothing, consuming nothing, as if it were a living breath held in time. Heat radiated outward but did not burn, it illuminated rather than destroyed. Moses stood transfixed, unable to move, aware that he had crossed into the heart of mystery. Every instinct told him to turn away, but another force, gentle, insistent, urged him closer. He stepped toward the fire until his shadow stretched long across the stones. When he spoke to himself, the words sounded distant, carried away by a wind that did not exist. The light trembled, and from within it came a sound unlike any he had ever heard. Not the rustle of leaves, not the cry of wind through canyons, but a voice shaped from light itself. It spoke his name once, then again, each syllable echoing through the air and into the marrow of his bones. He answered, his voice barely more than a whisper. The reply came not as thunder but as calm authority, commanding him to remove his sandals, for the ground beneath his feet was holy. The earth itself seemed to breathe as he obeyed, the stones alive with hidden fire. When he knelt, the desert that had been his exile became a temple, and the mountain transformed into the dwelling place of eternity. The voice continued, ancient and patient, revealing the suffering of a people far away and the task that awaited him. Moses listened, his heart beating as if struck by the rhythm of creation itself. Each word carried weight beyond understanding, not merely instruction, but transformation. In that light, time dissolved. The man who had wandered in silence became the chosen messenger, though he did not yet accept what that would mean. Terror mingled with awe. He questioned the fire, uncertain of his worth, his strength, his voice. How could a man who had fled from his homeland now return as an emissary of deliverance? The flame seemed to understand his doubt. Its glow deepened, radiating compassion rather than condemnation. It revealed to him a sign, power hidden in the ordinary, strength drawn from humility. The rod in his hand, the symbol of a shepherd's life, would become an instrument of divine will. When the light spoke of the eternal, Moses felt the fabric of language unravel within him. No image, no word could contain what he was hearing. The name revealed itself not as sound but as breath, existence itself declaring its being. He trembled before it, realizing that he was standing before the source of all life, the origin of every flame that had ever burned in the human heart. Long after the voice fell silent, the bush continued to glow, its fire steady and unconsuming. Moses remained there for hours, perhaps days, suspended between fear and revelation. When at last he rose, his face carried the reflection of that light. The desert had not changed, but he had. He gathered his staff, looked toward the distant horizon of Egypt, and knew the silence of Sinai would follow him wherever he went. Darkness stretched over the wilderness as Moses stood alone beneath a vault of stars. The fire on the mountain had faded, but its echo burned within his chest. Every thought circled around the command he had received, a task so immense that it felt like a mountain pressing down upon his shoulders. Deliver a people from bondage, defy the might of a king, walk back into the land of his past. The words resounded in his mind, clear as the sound of wind across stone. How could a man of exile, a shepherd hidden among the hills, become the voice of freedom for a nation? Each night he walked the desert paths, wrestling with doubt. The silence of Sinai no longer brought peace. It mirrored his uncertainty, magnifying it until his thoughts became storms. He spoke to the stars as if they might answer, asking whether the fire had been real or a vision born of loneliness. But the stillness held firm, offering neither comfort nor denial. Faith, he realized, was not the absence of fear, but the choice to move despite it. The memories of Egypt haunted him like ghosts. He could still see the faces of those who had suffered, hear the crack of whips and the cries of the oppressed. To return meant confronting his own failures, his exile, the blood on his hands. The past felt heavier than the task before him. Every step he considered taking toward Egypt felt like walking into the heart of judgment. Still, the voice within him did not fade. It pulsed like the hidden flame that had burned without consuming, steady and unwavering. He confided in the desert, for it was the only companion that understood the burden of silence. The sands shifted under his feet as he spoke his fears aloud, admitting his frailty to the empty air. The desert gave no answer, only the same still hum that had always been there, a reminder that purpose often hides beneath doubt, waiting for surrender rather than certainty. The more he listened, the more the silence began to change. It no longer mocked him. It listened, patient and vast. A shepherd's staff in his hand became both weight and promise. The memory of the burning bush lingered within its grain, a sign that divine power could rest in ordinary things. If the Eternal could ignite a thorn bush without destroying it, perhaps he could use a man scarred by failure to set a people free. That thought, fragile as it was, began to root within his soul. Sleep eluded him for many nights. In dreams he saw rivers of blood, skies turned to darkness, cities trembling beneath unseen forces. He saw faces of the enslaved looking toward him, not in accusation, but in hope. When he woke, sweat clung to his skin, and the taste of sand was dry in his mouth. Each vision seemed to strip away his hesitation, layer by layer, until only obedience remained. He looked toward the mountain often, its dark silhouette gleaming faintly under the moon. It no longer appeared silent, but alive, as though its stones were watching him, waiting for movement. The same ground that had once burned now seemed to pulse with quiet encouragement. He understood at last that he could not remain in hiding. The voice that had called him would not vanish into memory. It demanded action. By dawn, Moses gathered his few possessions and turned toward the rising sun. The road ahead stretched across endless sands toward Egypt's gates, glittering faintly in the distance. Behind him, the mountains stood still, the wind brushing its slopes in low, rhythmic tones like the breath of creation itself. The silence that once frightened him now felt like a companion, a reminder that divine purpose does not shout, it waits for the heart to listen. When Moses returned to Egypt, the air of the empire was thick with power and fear. The streets of the great cities glimmered with torchlight reflected on bronze and stone, and the Nile rolled heavy beneath the weight of offerings to forgotten gods. Pharaoh's palace towered above the land like a monument to pride, its walls covered in prayers to immortal kings. Into that world of gold and oppression stepped a man from the desert, carrying nothing but a staff and a message. His words cut through the grandeur of the court like wind slicing through sand. He spoke not as a supplicant, but as one who bore a command older than all thrones. The reaction was disbelief first, then fury. Pharaoh laughed, his voice echoing against pillars carved with hieroglyphs of conquest. But behind that laughter lay unease, for the eyes of the messenger did not waver. The old man who had once fled the city now stood as if the desert itself had forged him into something unbreakable. When defiance met prophecy, the land trembled. The river that had nourished Egypt for generations turned crimson, its surface thick with death. The sun dimmed beneath strange clouds, and storms of locusts swept across the fields like living shadows. Each sign carried both warning and invitation, a call to release what did not belong to the hands of men. Pharaoh's heart, however, hardened like the stones of his temples, and with every refusal the air grew heavier, charged with unseen forces gathering at the edge of the night. Amid the plagues and turmoil, whispers spread among the enslaved. Hope, fragile and unfamiliar, flickered like a hidden flame. They spoke of deliverance, of an end to chains, of a new dawn waiting beyond the desert. In secret corners of the city, songs were born, songs that trembled with fear but carried the seed of freedom. The people began to believe that the God who had spoken from fire now moved through their lives in ways they could not yet see. On the night of departure, the city slept under an unnatural stillness. Moonlight fell over narrow streets, glinting on doors marked with symbols of protection. Within the homes of the enslaved, candles burned low, their flames swaying gently as if stirred by invisible wings. Moses stood among his people, his face lined by years and purpose. He gave no grand speeches, only quiet instructions whispered from one to another as the sound of distant cries rose across the land. The hour came when silence broke. The chains of generations fell away not through battle, but through faith. Guided by unseen hands, families gathered what little they possessed and stepped into the night. The desert waited before them, vast and unknowable, its dunes gleaming pale beneath the stars. Behind them, Egypt shuddered beneath the weight of its own defiance, and the river that once gave life seemed to mourn. As they walked, the air carried a strange stillness, not of fear, but of awe. Each footstep upon the sand echoed with meaning, as though the earth itself acknowledged what was unfolding. Above them, the stars burned brighter than they ever had, as if heaven watched in solemn silence. The people did not look back. They moved forward toward a freedom they could not yet comprehend. Far ahead, the mountain of Moses rose faintly in the distance, its silhouette touched by the faintest glow. The journey toward it would be long and filled with trials, but it already called to them, a promise shimmering beyond the horizon. The wind carried their songs across the open sands, blending them with the eternal whisper of Sinai, the mountain that waited to speak once more. Morning light broke across the wasteland, painting the dunes in a soft golden haze. The people moved through that vast expanse like a river of dust, their footprints vanishing almost as soon as they were made. Each sunrise brought both promise and exhaustion, and every step forward was a step deeper into mystery. The wilderness tested more than their strength. It tested their faith, their patience, their understanding of freedom itself. Liberation had come like a storm, but peace proved far slower, stretching across miles of heat and silence. Water was scarce, and tempers flared beneath the relentless sun. Whispers spread through the camp as doubts grew heavy in the hearts of those who followed. They had escaped the whip and the chain, but the emptiness of the desert carried a different kind of weight. Hunger gnawed at belief, thirst eroded memory, and fear became a constant companion. The promise of deliverance began to feel distant, almost forgotten, buried beneath the endless rhythm of walking, resting, and walking again. At night, when fires flickered low and the wind moved through the tents, the people stared at the horizon where shadows rose like mountains. They asked whether the God who had split seas and broken empires could hear them in this silence. The sky above offered no words, only an infinity of stars that shimmered indifferently across the heavens. In that quiet, faith became an act of defiance, holding on to light when surrounded by nothing but darkness. Through that wilderness, Moses walked alone more often than with the crowd. His face bore the strain of both leadership and solitude, the weight of every doubt, every fear pressed upon him, and still he lifted his gaze toward the mountain that glimmered faintly on the horizon. It called to him like a memory half remembered, a promise waiting to be fulfilled. He spoke little, but his silence carried strength, a calm born of the fire that had once spoken his name. Sandstorms would rise without warning, swallowing the sky in a whirl of gold and crimson. During those hours, the world became a blur of motion and chaos. People clung to one another, blind and trembling, trusting that when the wind finally calmed, they would still be facing the right direction. Through it all, the pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night stood as unshakable beacons, signs that the divine still walked among them, unseen but never absent. Children born during the journey knew no other world than this moving sea of tents. To them, the desert was home, and the stories of Egypt sounded like distant dreams. They watched the elders pray for rain, for bread, for mercy, and they learned that faith was not about comfort, but perseverance. The sands beneath their feet became both their teacher and their test, sculpting endurance into their bones. Occasionally, the mountain would appear closer than before, its jagged outline rising like a vision out of the shimmering air. It looked both inviting and fearsome, its summit veiled in mist. The people spoke of it with both longing and dread, for they felt instinctively that something waited there, something that would reveal truth in ways none could predict. Each time they glimpsed it, hearts stirred with awe, as though the desert itself were leading them toward revelation. When night fell and the stars turned cold, silence reclaimed everything. The journey had stripped away comfort, possessions, even illusions. All that remained was dependence on unseen guidance, on one another, on faith itself. Through the endless testing, the people learned what no city could have taught them, that freedom is not merely the absence of chains, but the courage to keep walking when the path leads through fire and shadow alike. Wind coiled around the base of Sinai as Moses stood before its towering slopes, staring upward into a sky heavy with cloud and mystery. The people rested far below, their camp stretching like a sea of white canvas across the plain. The air carried a stillness that hummed with unseen energy, and every rock seemed to pulse beneath his feet. The time of wandering had reached its turning point. He knew that this mountain was not simply stone, it was a living threshold between the mortal and the divine. He began the climb before dawn, when the stars still burned faintly and the horizon glowed pale with coming light. Each step felt deliberate, heavy with unseen meaning. Loose stones shifted under his sandals, the scent of dust and cold air mingling as he ascended. With every breath, the world below grew smaller, and the silence deepened until it felt alive. He carried no companion, for the journey demanded solitude. What awaited him above could not be shared or witnessed by any other soul. The mountain seemed to test him with every stride. Jagged cliffs rose like walls, forcing him to find narrow passages between them. Winds cut against his face, sharp and cold, as though trying to turn him back. But he pressed forward, guided by a pull that came not from the world outside, but from the fire still burning within his memory. The same light that had once spoken through the bush now seemed to shimmer across the stones, faint but unmistakable. As the sun lifted over the desert, light poured through the canyons in brilliant shafts. The mountain glowed gold, then crimson, then white, its surface reflecting the full power of day. But even under that fierce radiance, the summit remained shrouded in mist, veiled as though protecting its secret. Moses paused often to rest, his eyes fixed on that distant veil, aware that each step carried him closer not only to revelation, but to transformation. Voices seemed to whisper through the wind, though no one else walked those paths. They did not speak in language but in sensation, vibrations of sound and presence that brushed against his consciousness. It felt as if the mountain itself was alive, recognizing the one who climbed it, remembering the covenant it was about to witness. Fear mingled with reverence as he pressed his hand to the rock, feeling warmth radiate from within the stone, like the slow heartbeat of the earth. Hours passed without measure. Hunger, thirst, and exhaustion lost their meaning. Only the rhythm of ascent remained, one step after another, the sound of his breathing merging with the murmurs of the wind. The world below disappeared completely, swallowed by haze. The air grew thin and electric, charged with anticipation, as if creation itself held still, waiting for the moment when the heavens would open once more. When he finally reached the higher slopes, the air shimmered with light. The mist thickened, swirling around him in spirals that seemed to move with purpose. He could see nothing clearly, yet he felt watched, surrounded not by emptiness, but by presence. He fell to his knees, overwhelmed by the sense of being seen completely, stripped of all pretense, standing at the threshold between life and eternity. Far below, the people looked up toward the peak, their eyes filled with awe and fear. They could not see him through the clouds, but they knew something was unfolding above that would shape their destiny. The mountain groaned softly, a deep, rumbling sound that traveled through the ground like a pulse. Above it all, the sky gathered into darkness, heavy with the promise of revelation. Clouds swirled thick around the summit, black and silver, alive with movement. Lightning flashed within them, illuminating the sky in blinding bursts. The mountain shook beneath the weight of unseen power, its stones vibrating with a rhythm that seemed to echo through the soul. The air was no longer air. It was alive, dense with sound and light. Moses stood alone at the edge of the storm, his cloak whipping in the wind, his face lit by the alternating brilliance and shadow that danced across the heavens. From the depths of the cloud came a roar, not merely thunder, but a voice so immense it seemed to fill the entire world. The ground trembled, and the air itself rippled as though struck by invisible hands. The people below fell to their knees, their cries lost beneath the crashing sky. The sound was not of destruction, but of revelation, a declaration of presence too vast for words. Moses raised his hands toward it, and the light engulfed him. Fire coursed along the ridges, tracing veins of molten gold across the rock. Each flash illuminated faces carved into the cliffs, shapes formed by the lightning itself, wings, eyes, forms both human and beyond human. The air smelled of ozone and burning stone. Every element seemed alive, charged with awareness, participating in the divine drama unfolding above the earth. To witness such a moment was to stand within the breath of creation itself. The voice continued, layered and infinite, neither male nor female, neither near nor far. It spoke through wind, through fire, through trembling ground. Moses listened, not with ears but with his entire being, as words older than time poured through him. Each syllable carried the force of law, of covenant, of unity between heaven and man. The sound was overwhelming and beautiful, terrifying and tender all at once. Down in the valley the people watched the spectacle unfold, their fear mingling with awe. The sky churned like a living sea, and the mountain blazed with radiant fire. Many turned their faces away, unable to bear the sight. The air vibrated with energy that felt almost tangible, pressing against the skin, filling lungs with light instead of air. No one could mistake what was happening. Sinai was no longer stone, it was alive, breathing in rhythm with the voice that filled it. As lightning struck the peak, a brilliant column of light rose skyward, linking earth and heaven in a single, unbroken current. Time itself seemed to stop. In that instant, all things, past, present, and future, merged into one eternal moment. Moses stood within it, eyes closed, the fire reflecting in every line of his face. The boundaries between man and divine blurred, and for a heartbeat he was not separate from the voice, but part of it, speaking and being spoken. When the thunder softened and the wind began to fall, silence settled over the mountain like a sacred shroud. Smoke curled from the rocks and the scent of fire lingered in the cool air. The clouds withdrew slowly, revealing the summit bathed in soft light. No ordinary storm had passed through this place. The mountain itself seemed transformed, purified by flame, etched with the memory of the divine encounter. Far below, the people wept and bowed their heads. They did not understand the words that had been spoken, but they felt them in the marrow of their bones. The desert around them had changed, no longer empty, but alive with holiness. Above them, the mountain stood silent again, though its stones glowed faintly, as if still holding the echo of a voice too vast for the human world. Smoke drifted across the summit, curling into the heavens like offerings from an unseen altar. Moses stood within the glow of a fading storm, surrounded by silence so pure it seemed to hum through the air. The ground beneath his feet still radiated heat from the lightning that had struck it, and faint traces of flame lingered in the cracks between the stones. He felt the weight of eternity pressing around him, not as a burden, but as a presence, immeasurable, unending, alive. Within that luminous stillness, light began to gather once more. It did not descend from above, but seemed to rise from within the rock itself, coalescing into shapes of brightness that pulsed like living hearts. Before his eyes, the fire took form, weaving itself into patterns that resembled language, symbols of divine thought made visible. It was not writing as men knew it, but energy shaped into meaning. The air shimmered as the mountain spoke through light and stone, engraving upon creation itself the bond between heaven and earth. Moses watched, unable to move, as two slabs of rock emerged from the glowing ground. Their surfaces burned without burning, etched by hands unseen, each stroke alive with radiance. The fire that inscribed them was not destructive. It carved permanence into impermanence, turning stone into scripture. He felt every mark within his soul, as if the law was not being written before him, but within him. Each commandment resonated like a chord, binding him to the voice that had thundered moments before. When the last symbol blazed into being, the air fell still again. The fire dimmed, leaving the tablets warm and heavy with light. He stepped forward and laid his hands upon them, feeling not stone but pulse, a steady rhythm echoing the heartbeat of the divine. The mountain was silent, but its silence spoke of completion, of a covenant sealed not in ink or blood, but in the language of eternity. Far below, the people waited, gazing up at the cloud-crowned peak. They saw flashes of light ripple across the sky and believed the mountain itself was alive. Fear mingled with devotion, for they understood that something sacred was unfolding beyond their sight. Every soul felt the tremor of it, though none could name what it was. Faith had become more than belief. It had become an atmosphere, pressing against their skin and stirring their hearts in unison. High above them, Moses remained in communion with the silence. He traced his fingers over the luminous script, trying to grasp the depth of what had been entrusted to him. The laws were not mere rules, they were reflections of cosmic order, echoes of creation's original harmony. They spoke of balance, of justice, of the sacred bond between life and spirit. They were not meant only for his people, but for all who would ever listen to the voice that spoke through conscience and compassion. Clouds thinned slowly, revealing a sky washed clean by thunder. The light that had once blinded now softened into gold. The mountain glowed faintly beneath the sun, and Moses, holding the tablets close, knew he had been transformed. He was no longer only a man, nor a messenger, but a vessel carrying the covenant between the eternal and the mortal. With each breath, he felt the rhythm of the universe moving through him. When he began his descent, the path seemed longer than before. Each step carried the echo of revelation, each shadow whispered with the fire's memory. He carried not only stone but responsibility, the living promise of divine order entrusted to fragile human hands. The air below shimmered with anticipation, for the world was about to hear the echo of heaven carved into the heart of earth. Down in the valley, the days of waiting had stretched into an eternity. The people watched the mountain wrapped in its cloak of smoke and fire, uncertain whether their leader would return. The thunder had faded, but the memory of its power lingered, echoing in their minds like distant drums. Fear began to seep through the camp, subtle at first, then spreading like wind across the dunes. Without the voice of Moses to guide them, silence became unbearable. Faith, once fierce and bright, began to flicker. The desert, vast and merciless, pressed against the people's thoughts, whispering of abandonment. They looked upon the motionless mountain and saw only distance. The awe that had once sustained them now turned to doubt. They longed for something tangible, something they could touch and see, for belief, built solely upon silence, proved heavy for hearts accustomed to sound. Whispers grew into murmurs, murmurs into voices, and voices into resolve. They gathered around Aaron, the brother left behind to lead them, and pleaded for a sign. The divine had spoken through thunder and flame, but now the sky was empty. They demanded a God they could behold, one that would walk among them in form, if not in spirit. The request came not from rebellion alone, but from fear, the kind that grows when faith is forced to wait too long. Aaron hesitated, torn between obedience and compassion. He saw the desperation in their faces, the way uncertainty gnawed at them like hunger. In a moment of weakness, he yielded. Gold was collected, melted, and reshaped under trembling hands. As the molten metal cooled, it took on the image of a calf, a creature both powerful and harmless, born of earth rather than heaven. The people looked upon it and felt comfort, mistaking its stillness for presence. Drums began to sound across the valley, slow and rhythmic, echoing the heartbeat of humanity seeking reassurance. Dancers moved around the image, their voices rising in chants that mingled longing with relief. The air filled with dust and song, and for a moment, despair seemed forgotten. They had exchanged silence for sound, absence for image, faith for certainty. The mountain still loomed above them, but few looked toward it now. As night fell, firelight flickered against the golden idol, casting rippling reflections across the crowd. The sound of celebration filled the desert, but beneath the music lingered something hollow. Their joy felt forced, a fragile wall built against the fear of divine abandonment. Deep within, an unease stirred, though none dared speak it aloud. They did not know that the storm of revelation had not ended. It had only moved closer. Wind shifted suddenly, sweeping through the camp with the scent of ozone and ash. The torches flickered, and the noise faltered. A murmur passed through the crowd as eyes turned once more toward the mountain. Its summit glowed faintly in the dark, a reminder of the covenant they had forgotten. The songs grew softer, and hearts began to tremble under the weight of their choice. Above, unseen among the rocks, a solitary figure descended, carrying light within his arms. Each step echoed with the gravity of what had been broken below. The mountain had given him the fire of eternity, but the valley would confront him with the fragility of man. The meeting between heaven's law and earth's weakness was about to unfold beneath a sky that had witnessed both revelation and rebellion. When Moses reached the valley floor, the sight before him struck like a blow. The camp that had once waited in reverent silence now throbbed with noise and motion. Firelight flickered on the golden calf, and the crowd swayed in fevered rhythm around it. He stopped where the shadow of the mountain fell across the scene, his heart heavy with both fury and grief. The air itself seemed to recoil from what it witnessed. The sound of laughter turned hollow, breaking under the weight of his presence. In his hands the tablets glowed faintly, their surface alive with traces of divine fire. He looked upon them and then upon the idol, the contrast so stark it pierced through his soul. The covenant had been broken before it was even shared. He felt the ache of betrayal, not personal but sacred, as though creation itself had been wounded. Without hesitation, he raised the tablets high and hurled them to the ground. The sound of shattering stone echoed through the desert, like thunder called down from the sky once more. Silence fell instantly. The music died, the drums stopped, and the people froze, their joy evaporating into dread. Smoke rose from the fractured remains of the tablets, twisting into the night air. Moses moved toward the idol, his face set with purpose, eyes reflecting the light of the shattered covenant. He tore down the image, casting it into the fire until its form dissolved into molten streams. The golden shine that had promised comfort turned to smoke, vanishing into the wind. His voice carried across the valley, not as a cry of rage, but as a judgment born of sorrow. He spoke of faith forgotten, of promises betrayed, of the fragility of the human heart that sought shape for what could never be contained. Every word struck the air like the toll of a bell, reverberating through the gathered crowd. Tears fell freely among them, for they knew the truth of his words and felt the weight of their failure. As the flames died, a strange quiet descended upon the desert. The air cooled, and stars emerged overhead, sharp and clear. Among the ruins of the idol, the people knelt, humbled and broken. Moses looked upon them and saw not enemies of faith, but children lost in their fear. Compassion, fierce and consuming, rose within him, overtaking his anger. For even as judgment burned, mercy stirred in its shadow. He turned his gaze once more toward the mountain, its dark outline gleaming faintly under the moon. He knew the covenant could not remain broken, that forgiveness must rise from the ashes of disobedience. Gathering himself, he prepared to ascend once more, to plead not only for his people, but for the very idea of humanity's worthiness to carry divine law. Each step he took back toward Sinai carried both grief and hope intertwined. Those who watched saw their leader vanish into the shadows of the slopes, and a new silence filled the camp, one not of fear, but of prayer. Smoke drifted upward, carrying with it the unspoken longing for restoration. The people waited, chastened, hearts softened by the recognition of how easily holiness can be lost and how deeply it is desired once gone. Above them, the mountain stood unmoving, its peak still touched by faint fire. In that stillness lay promise, the certainty that from destruction could emerge renewal, from shattered stone, new covenant, from wrath, forgiveness. The desert had become a teacher once more, whispering through the cool night air that holiness, once awakened, never truly departs. It only waits for the heart to listen again. Night returned to Sinai, wrapping the slopes in a veil of shadow and cold starlight. Moses climbed once more, the air around him alive with quiet expectancy. The broken covenant weighed heavily in his heart, though his spirit refused despair. Above the ridge, clouds began to gather, but their glow was not the dull grey of rain. It shimmered within a fire, hues of gold and silver flickering through the mist. The desert below slept, but the mountain had awakened, aware of the presence drawing near. Wind rose gently, carrying a sound unlike any earthly movement. It was music without source, harmony woven into air, each note touching the edges of human hearing before fading into light. Moses paused, eyes lifted toward the summit, and saw forms descending through the clouds. They moved not like falling stars, nor like men walking upon rock, but with a grace that seemed to fold space itself. Their bodies shone with transparent radiance, outlines of flame and brilliance that shifted like reflections upon water. Ancient tradition speaks of that night when heaven bent low and angels walked upon the mountain. Their wings, woven of living light, did not stir the air, but illuminated it, each motion scattering sparks that drifted downward like embers from a sacred fire. Moses stood among them, trembling not from fear, but from recognition. These were not strangers to creation, but its oldest companions, keepers of the divine word, carriers of the unbroken song that binds the worlds together. They spoke without language, their communication pure as breath. Meaning flowed directly into thought, bypassing words entirely. He felt within their presence both gentleness and vast power, the serenity of eternity balanced against the intensity of stars. Their light did not blind but clarified, revealing layers of reality he had never before perceived. Around him, the mountains seemed to melt into radiance until there was no separation between stone and spirit. Through that exchange, Moses understood that revelation was never solitary. The covenant he carried was not only between man and the eternal, but shared among all realms of being. The angels were witnesses, guardians of the connection forged that night between infinite and finite. They encircled the summit, their brightness forming a crown around the mountain's head. From below, those who dared to look upward claimed to see the glow reflected upon the clouds, as if dawn had come before its time. Each angel bore within its essence a different hue of divine flame, emerald for mercy, sapphire for wisdom, crimson for justice, and white for purity. Together their light painted the air with colors no eye had seen before. The mountain resonated beneath their presence, humming like a great instrument struck by invisible hands. Moses felt himself suspended between creation and eternity, a single thread woven into a tapestry that spanned the universe. They showed him visions of worlds beyond sight, oceans of light stretching beyond the stars, realms where song replaced speech, where being itself was prayer. He saw how the same hand that shaped stars had shaped humanity, fragile but luminous, capable of holding sparks of the divine. Through their radiance, he understood that the mountain was not the destination, but the mirror, reflecting the infinite within mortal perception. As dawn approached, the angels began to fade, not departing, but dissolving back into the light from which they came. Their glow merged with the rising sun, blending heaven and earth into a single canvas of brilliance. Moses remained motionless, his soul burning with gratitude and awe. The mountains sighed with wind, carrying the faint echo of wings through the still air. For those who slept in the valley, the first rays of day felt different that morning, warm, alive, touched by something unseen but deeply present. Mist clung to the slopes as Moses knelt upon the quiet rock, heart stilled by the memory of radiant wings. The voices of angels had faded, leaving behind a silence more profound than sound itself. Within that vast hush, another presence began to unfold, subtle, immeasurable, older than the stars. It surrounded him like air, but carried the intimacy of breath, touching his thoughts with gentleness and command. This was not vision nor dream, but direct encounter with the essence of being itself. A question formed within his spirit, unspoken but heard. He had known the fire that does not consume, the law inscribed in light, the messengers of heaven who sing without words, but now he yearned to understand the source behind them all. What name could contain such magnitude? What word could define that which existed before speech, before creation? His heart trembled with both daring and devotion, for he sought the mystery that cannot be uttered. Light began to gather once again, not before him, but within him. It pulsed softly, rhythmically, like the beating of an eternal heart. The air shimmered, and within that living radiance came a sound that was not sound, a single syllable that carried the power of existence itself. It was not meant for the ear, but for the soul, a resonance that filled every part of him with recognition. The name revealed was not merely a title, but the essence of life, the vibration upon which reality is built. He understood then that creation itself was the speaking of that name, and that every breath ever taken was its echo. To know it was to glimpse the unity behind all opposites, light and shadow, joy and sorrow, being and void. This knowledge was not granted for possession, but for transformation. He was to carry it not as secret power, but as silent awareness, a truth too vast for language, yet capable of shaping hearts. The name burned within him like invisible flame, refining pride, cleansing fear, and filling him with unshakable humility. Its sound continued within his chest, reminding him that divinity was not distant, but dwelling within all that lived. Clouds moved across the summit, their edges glowing faintly as if tracing the breath of the unseen. Every gust of wind spoke fragments of the same syllable, and every grain of sand trembled with recognition. He felt the entire desert awaken around him, alive with the whisper of the eternal word. To speak it aloud would be to break its sanctity, to confine what was boundless. Its power lay not in utterance, but in remembrance, the knowledge that life itself was sacred speech. When Moses rose, he did so quietly, bearing no tablet, no visible sign. The revelation was not something he could hold, but something that had become part of him. His gaze softened, and his steps grew light, as though he carried a new rhythm, a melody woven from silence. Those who later met him would sense the change without understanding it. They would see the reflection of that unspoken word shimmering in his eyes. As he descended once more, dawn stretched across the desert, illuminating the peaks with pale gold. Each ray of sunlight seemed to murmur the same secret, though none could decipher it. The mountain behind him stood still, content in its mystery, a silent witness to the moment when man had heard creation breathe its own name. Centuries passed, and the sands shifted endlessly around the mountain. Empires rose and fell, their monuments swallowed by the same desert that once cradled revelation. Still, Sinai stood unmoved, its jagged crown reaching toward heaven like a memory carved into the earth. Pilgrims came from distant lands, drawn by stories older than their nations, seeking to feel even a fragment of the silence that once spoke. The air remained charged, as though the mountain still waited for the next listener to arrive. Monks built small stone cells near its base, their walls blackened by the smoke of oil lamps. At night, they listened to the wind whistling through the canyons, convinced that it carried fragments of divine language. Many claimed to hear faint music in the distance, tones that resonated in harmony with the beating of the heart. They did not question whether it was imagination, for faith had taught them that truth is not measured by sight or proof, but by stillness. As they ascended, their breath slowed and time began to dissolve. The desert's vastness stripped away every illusion of control, leaving only the essential, a soul standing before eternity. When they reached the summit, they often wept without knowing why, as though something deep within them remembered the fire that once burned there. Legends spread through generations, crossing languages and faiths, stories told of angels still guarding the mountain, of mysterious lights seen drifting along its ridges, of voices calling softly across the wind at night. Each tale differed in form but carried the same truth. Sinai remained alive, a conduit between worlds, whispering to those who dared to listen with more than ears. Hermits who dwelled there wrote of dreams in which the mountain itself spoke. It did not deliver new laws or prophecies, but reminded them of the ancient covenant between Creator and creation. They described visions of flame that did not consume, of hands carved from light, of stars bending low to kiss the stones. Their writings, preserved through centuries, carried the fragrance of something both mystical and familiar, a reminder that holiness is never bound by time. Travelers who descended from Sinai often carried subtle transformations. Their eyes shone with quiet clarity, their voices softened, and their pace slowed, as if their souls had attuned to the rhythm of the mountain. They returned to their homelands carrying no relics, no visible tokens, only a silence that changed how they lived. Through them, the echoes of revelation spread farther than fire ever could. Even as the world modernized and the deserts filled with the noise of machines, Sinai retained its gravity. Pilgrims still arrived before dawn, wrapped in woolen cloaks, climbing in the pale light of stars. When they reached the peak, the first touch of sun painted their faces gold, and for a fleeting moment they understood what ancient prophets had felt, that divinity is not locked in heaven, but breathing through every grain of dust, every breath of wind. Through all ages, the mountain's silence has never ceased speaking. It murmurs through the wind, hums beneath the stones, and lingers in the hearts of those who pause long enough to listen. Sinai does not demand belief. It invites remembrance. Within its stillness, time folds upon itself, and every soul who climbs its slopes joins the same timeless chorus that began when heaven first touched the earth. At the foot of Sinai, where stone meets shadow, a sanctuary stands in quiet defiance of time. Walls of sun-baked granite rise from the sand, their surfaces scarred by wind and centuries, but still breathing with devotion. Monks built this fortress of faith upon the very soil, believed to cradle the roots of the burning bush, the same fire that once spoke to a shepherd in exile. Within these ancient walls, silence is not emptiness, but prayer. Every flicker of candlelight carries the echo of revelation. Inside the monastery, corridors twist like veins of memory through rock that has witnessed more dawns than history can recall. Lamps of beaten copper cast gentle light upon icons darkened by age, their faces shimmering with quiet radiance. The air smells of incense and myrrh, mingled with the faint sweetness of oil and stone. Each breath feels like a continuation of ancient worship, a dialogue with eternity whispered through time. Scriptures written by hand rest behind glass, their pages weathered, their ink faded but alive with meaning. Greek, Syriac, Arabic, Coptic. All languages converge here, bound together by devotion that transcends words. In the library's stillness, one hears the scratching of quills long vanished, the murmur of monks chanting in the dim glow of dawn. This place is not only a refuge for faith, but a guardian of memory, protecting what humanity has too easily forgotten, that holiness thrives in the quiet endurance of those who listen. The monks who live here move like shadows through stone halls, wrapped in black robes that rustle softly against the floor. They wake before sunrise to sing psalms that echo off the granite walls, their voices blending with the wind outside. Between prayer and labor, they tend gardens coaxed from barren ground, coaxing green life from dust. Every act, no matter how simple, becomes liturgy. Every moment, no matter how brief, becomes sacred. Pilgrims approach the monastery gates with bowed heads, carrying offerings of oil or bread, seeking more than blessings. They seek stillness. Many arrive weary from the climb, their faces drawn by the desert's trials. Within the cool shadow of the walls, they find reprieve not through miracles, but through quiet understanding. The monks rarely speak, but their presence carries peace heavier than any sermon. In their eyes glows a reflection of the mountain's eternal flame. At night, the monastery glows faintly under moonlight, its stones silvered by the stillness of the desert. The wind hums through the narrow passages, echoing like distant chanting. Within the chapel, candles burn without sound, their smoke curling upward in thin, delicate streams. Pilgrims who stay to pray describe an almost tangible stillness, a feeling that the air itself remembers the voice that once spoke through fire. Through centuries of invasions and storms, the sanctuary has endured, protected by geography and grace alike. Empires rose and vanished beyond its walls, but within, time stands still. The monks believe this endurance to be its own miracle, a quiet testament to the power of faith lived rather than declared. They do not guard treasure of gold or relic of war, but something more elusive, the atmosphere of holiness, lingering like perfume, long after the flame has gone. Before dawn, as the first light brushes the summit above, the bell tolls across the valley. Its tone is deep, patient, and familiar, echoing across the centuries. For those who hear it even once, it feels as though the mountain itself is calling them home. Beneath the eternal gaze of Sinai, the monastery remains a heartbeat of prayer, carved into stone, a living reminder that where revelation once blazed, devotion still burns quietly. Across the wilderness surrounding Sinai, the desert guards its mysteries with the patience of eternity. Beneath shifting dunes lie fragments of forgotten journeys, inscriptions etched into stone, shards of pottery scorched by ancient fires, pathways that disappear and reappear like memories half remembered. Archaeologists who wander these plains speak of trails older than empires, faint markings that hint at the footprints of those who once followed the prophet through endless wilderness. The sand conceals as much as it reveals, preserving both truth and myth in equal measure. Among the red cliffs, faint carvings depict figures raising their arms to the sky, lines spiraling into symbols no one has fully deciphered. Some see maps, others prayers. The desert offers no explanation, only silence that invites interpretation. Each mark upon the stone becomes a question whispered across millennia. Who left these signs, and what were they seeking beneath this boundless sky? Those who study them often confess to a sensation beyond reason, a feeling that the land itself is aware of their searching. Ancient travelers once believed the sands to be alive, shifting not only with wind but with will. Stories tell of caravans vanishing where no storm raged, of stones that glowed faintly at night, as though remembering celestial fire. Though science explains little of these tales, their persistence hints at something more than imagination, a lingering presence woven through the land like breath through the body. The desert remembers what men forget. Nomads who dwell near the mountain still speak of hidden wells where the water tastes faintly sweet, as if infused with blessings from another world. They guide seekers through labyrinths of rock, past ruins so eroded they appear more natural than built. To them, these remnants are not merely history, but testimony, a map of divine footprints scattered across the earth. When night falls and the stars unfold above, their songs retell stories of light descending upon stone, of voices speaking from clouds, of an invisible covenant etched upon the heart of the desert. Occasionally, explorers uncover fragments of ancient script or broken altars buried deep beneath layers of dust. Each discovery stirs debate, evidence of the Exodus, or relics of civilizations long forgotten. The question remains unanswered, but perhaps it was never meant to be. The true significance of these traces lies not in proof, but in wonder. Every stone touched by human hands becomes part of the same vast story, linking ages through faith and longing. In the heat of noon, when the air wavers like liquid glass, travelers pause to rest in the shadow of the mountain. They find the ground warm beneath their palms, pulsing faintly as though life moves through it. Scholars call it imagination, but those who linger longer feel something deeper, a rhythm that connects them to the countless souls who once crossed this same barren sea in search of meaning. The silence here is alive, holding secrets too ancient for words. When night arrives, the desert transforms. The air cools and constellations blaze across the sky in unbearable beauty. From high above, the dunes resemble waves of an endless ocean, frozen mid-motion. It is said that if one listens closely, the wind carries faint whispers, phrases that resemble prayer. The sands, it seems, still sing for those who have the patience to listen. Though explorers continue to search for proof, Sinai keeps its treasure hidden. The truest relics are not found beneath the ground, but within the human heart. The desert teaches by stripping away everything unnecessary until only the essential remains: silence, wonder, and a sense that divinity dwells not in evidence, but in the mystery itself. As dusk falls upon Sinai, the mountain appears suspended between two worlds. The desert glows with amber light, and the sky deepens into violet, blending heaven and earth into a seamless horizon. To stand there at twilight is to feel the veil between realms grow thin, as if the same fire that once descended might awaken again. The stones, warmed by centuries of sun, seem to pulse with memory. Every shadow carries weight. Every breeze whispers of a moment when creation leaned close to humanity. Travelers who arrive here often describe a strange sensation of familiarity, as though they are returning to a place they have never visited. Perhaps it is the stillness that does it, or the sense that each grain of sand carries the echo of divine presence. The mountain no longer blazes with visible flame, but its silence burns just as brightly. To walk near its slopes is to feel watched, not by eyes of judgment, but by awareness itself. Legends across faiths converge upon this place. Jews call it the Mountain of Covenant, Christians the Mount of Revelation, Muslims the site of divine speech. Each tradition tells of fire and voice, of law and mercy intertwined. Though the stories differ in language and form, all agree on one truth. Here, the infinite once touched the finite, and the world has never been the same. Those who meditate upon this mystery see Sinai not only as a location, but as a symbol of encounter. The ascent mirrors the journey of the soul, from ignorance to understanding, from fear to love, from separation to unity. The summit is not reached by foot alone, but by surrender, by the willingness to climb inward as much as upward. The mountain becomes a mirror reflecting the divine image hidden within all who seek it. At night, the stars cluster close above the peak, and the silence grows so profound it feels like sound reversed. The air vibrates softly as if the mountain itself hums with remembrance. Monks, pilgrims, and wanderers alike describe a shared awareness when standing there, that holiness still lingers, though unseen. They speak of feeling smaller than dust and larger than time in the same instant, humbled and exalted by the stillness. The land surrounding Sinai remains barren, but within that barrenness lies abundance. Emptiness here is not lack, but presence, space wide enough for eternity to dwell. The mountain's silence does not demand belief, it invites awakening. Those who listen discover that the fire of revelation was never extinguished but merely withdrawn, waiting within the heart for those who dare to remember. Through centuries, countless feet have climbed these slopes, leaving behind no trace but faith. The air still carries the breath of their prayers. Perhaps holiness is not something bestowed once and finished, but something continually reborn wherever awe is felt deeply enough to silence thought. Sinai stands as the eternal witness of that mystery, the meeting place of opposites, where spirit and matter, heaven and earth, become one. As twilight folds itself across the desert, Sinai drifts once more into silence. The mountain stands as it always has, ancient, unmoving, alive with memory. Wind slips through the canyons, brushing against the stones that have witnessed millennia of footsteps. Long after the last pilgrim has descended, the summit still hums with quiet power, as though the fire that once crowned it continues to burn beneath the surface. Light fades, but the presence lingers, patient as eternity. Across the centuries, the mountain's shadow has stretched far beyond its stones. From this solitary peak, faith spread into the hearts of nations. Words spoken in lightning became foundations of law and conscience. Monks, mystics, and wanderers have all returned to tell of the same truth, different in language but united in essence. Sinai remains the still heart of humanity's search for meaning, an eternal conversation between creation and its source. Even now, travelers from distant lands arrive before dawn, guided by stories told across generations. They climb in silence, their lanterns weaving constellations upon the slopes. When the sun finally lifts above the horizon, they do not cheer or shout. They simply breathe. In that fragile moment when the first light strikes the stones, they feel what prophets once felt. The infinite drawing near in the form of warmth and wind. Time moves onward, but Sinai does not age. It stands beyond history, beyond empire, beyond the shifting noise of the modern world. Every gust of wind that moves across its ridges seems to carry the same message, a reminder that holiness is not trapped in temples or texts, but breathed into the world itself. The mountain calls not to the chosen few, but to anyone willing to be still long enough to hear. At night, when stars bloom above the summit, silence stretches outward like an ocean. The same constellations that watched Moses walk still shimmer overhead, untouched by centuries. For those who linger, sleep comes easily here. The heart slows, the body rests, and dreams unfold in the language of fire and cloud. Within those dreams, one might almost sense wings passing overhead, or the murmur of ancient voices still echoing through stone. When dawn returns, the desert awakens once more, its colors reborn, its silence renewed. The mountain stands golden beneath the rising sun, whispering its timeless truth. That revelation was never a single moment, but an endless rhythm, appearing, fading, returning again within each heart that dares to listen. Sinai does not speak through thunder anymore. It speaks through stillness, through the quiet courage of faith kept alive in ordinary lives. Those who have touched its slopes carry that silence back into the world. They become bearers of unseen fire, gentle, steady, enduring. Wherever they walk, the mountain walks with them, in the rhythm of their breath, in the calm between words, in the compassion that flickers within their gaze. The voice that spoke in flames still whispers, reminding them that every heart is a fragment of the same holy ground. Sinai remains carved into the soul of the earth, a bridge between sky and dust, between what was and what will be. And though centuries will pass and languages will change, its call endures. For as long as wind moves through desert and light falls upon stone, the mountain that once burned with divine fire will continue to whisper, softly but endlessly. Remember, the story of Mount Sinai is not a tale locked in the past. It is a mirror held up to the soul, reminding each of us that divinity still lingers in the quiet spaces of the world. The same fire that once blazed upon that ancient summit burns within every moment of wonder, every act of kindness, every breath of awe that connects humanity to something greater than itself. If this journey through desert and time has spoken to your heart, if the silence of Sinai has stirred something within you, then let its whisper continue to travel. Subscribe to the channel to join us for more stories that awaken memory and mystery. Like this film to help its flame reach further across the world. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your reflections are part of this ongoing pilgrimage of the spirit. And if the story has touched you, share it with those you love, so the voice that once spoke on the mountain may keep echoing through hearts, through generations, through the quiet miracle of listening.